Hello, everybody, and welcome to NHL Gamer right here on YouTube, of course. My name, as you know, Tougie, joined as always by my broadcast partner, Cyn, and today we have a bit of a season recap / playoff preview video for you today because, as Cyn and I talked about all season long, there are a lot of stories that played out throughout the entirety of the Elite Division, and we want to make sure, of course, that we can pretty much cover and tell the full story for what went down this year. So, Cyn, we have a lot to talk about, and we're just going to keep this part in. Why? Because I'm lazy and don't want to make more edits and post. Cyn, what we're going to do here, of course, we do want to talk about the playoff matchups. That's the main thing to talk about here, to really set the stage for the incredible 4 first-round matchups that we have. But we also want to talk about the teams that weren't so lucky and the teams that just happened to either barely miss out in an incredibly close playoff race. Of course, we can get you a look at the standings here in a second, and there you see them now. Of course, on that left-hand side of your bracket, the teams that made the playoffs. On the right, the teams that didn't. And, of course, the point totals there. You can see it just how close it was for some of these teams, including a certain team that we'll talk about who missed out because of, I believe, 1 goal in goal differential. So brutal year in and year out how close it is. I remember last year, Cyn, we had Vesapampa miss out on the playoffs by 1 point, but they finished in 11th that far back. That's how close that playoff race was. So again, a lot to talk about here. And I want to kick things off by talking about the 2 teams at the very bottom of the standings. We have Conquer Gaming and Dark Horse. Now, Dark Horse, unfortunately, first team that we'll talk about here, were the club to finish dead last, meaning that they have been automatically relegated down to our second tier pro division. And said it's incredibly rough for them because they won last year. Season 10 ECL Pro, most wins in the league, and they went on as well to win the tournament to get automatic promotion, and now they find themselves right back down. But Cyn, I think the key for them, we had some lineup changes that happened to really affect them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Virtue, Maquis, and the depth defense and original Jets are the only 3 players to stick with the club throughout, the transition. Olishki returned to the club after a season in light, but I mean, that many changes when you're transitioning from pro to elite can be absolutely massive. I mean, defense and goaltending completely changed. I mean, can't go into a season in such a competitive division and hope to really have that much of an impact. Now, obviously, they wanted to, and they did their best. They played their hearts out, but it just wasn't meant to be this season.
Absolutely. They picked up Viljo and Yanuri on defense, 2 elite division nomads, as I'd call them. A lot of experience, but playing with different teams. They also picked up Karki. She had played for repeat in pro, but no prior elite experience for her. And honestly, Cyn, they just didn't gel as a team. The fewest goals for, the most against, 0-8-2 in their last 10 games. A very interesting offseason for them. We saw last year's last place finish in Almost Famous completely dissolved in the aftermath of that loss. So a lot of questions in regards to their future. Now, Cyn, one of the things we're going to do here, though, at the very least, is name a team MVP for every club. Tough choice for a team that struggled this much, but who do you think is the player to look at and say, hey, at least they had a solid season?
You know, I got to say it's Virtue. I mean, the only player to break the 20-point mark, and, you always want someone at least closing in on the point per game mark, and Virtue did his best to help carry his team, at least on the offensive side of things.
Absolutely. With that, let's talk a little bit about Conquer Gaming as well, who finished second bottom. They will be in the relegation playoffs at least, so they have a chance to fight for their survival. Newly rebranded, formerly known as the Ghetto Firebirds. It was their 3rd straight season in Elite. They missed the playoffs, but like we said, avoided relegation. Actually, they missed the playoffs last year and avoided relegation as well. So they've been playing with fire for a little bit now. Couple of lineup changes. They lost Sockham to Kova. He put up 19 points in 30 games last year on D. However, I mean, the replacement went kind of well. I mean, Sockham had a similar output for Kova this year, but his replacement, the elite rookie and Talon Mies, did put up 17 points in 30 games. So very close in terms of impact on the score sheet, although Talon Mies is a lot less of a physical player. And then there's EA Bunka as well, who they lost to SJ. 47-point season last year, put up 42 points this year. So that was a huge loss for the club. He was replaced by rookie Titanov, who put up 32 points in 30 games. Someone who is absolutely up there, I would say, for rookie of the year. Cyn, what would you say would be the biggest issue for this team this season, though?
Well, historically, there's always kind of been that one thing. When they were Ghetto Firebirds in the previous season, I believe they lost 8 or 9 games in overtime. Now, that is a lot of points left on the table, and that was a big reason that they ended up missing the playoffs in the last season. Now, I think this year, the biggest issue is point production. You know, Yurtzik, Vilce kind of fell off a bit. Yurtzik, he had 4 less points total, all of them goals. And when you're missing goals like that, it's just not going to get the job done. Now, if you're Conquer, you hate to feel like you're regressing, but at this point, all they want to do is just try to stay in the elite division as well. And I mentioned Vilce, he dropped from 39 points to just 26, I believe, in this previous season. I mean, if you want to stay in the elite division, if you want to, improve, you have to keep up the same level of production or improve upon it. Consistency is needed at this level.
Absolutely. And I think, too, when talking about a team MVP, I'd have to name Uresti, the goaltender at this stage. Similar numbers compared to the season prior, but with a weaker team in front of him, he gave his team a chance and does give his team a fighting chance in the playoffs. Now, we did get a word from quite a few members of the squads, including here in this instance, the captain, Kapako, who had this to say about the season. Definitely some major roster changes that we had to overcome. We had to rebuild the entire right-hand side. Titanov's been affiliated with the club, so he was an obvious choice to fill in, and Talonmees we viewed as a really young and hungry player. So we knew we had lost some skill, but the team play would be there. Just didn't go according to plan, though. We just weren't at the level that we needed to be, and we simply didn't have the consistency in all 3 zones that we needed, and I take blame for that as captain. And in terms of our future, we'll see how the upcoming relegation series plays out. So, again, you talk about it. Our focus here, beyond this kind of primer, is going to be on the playoff teams, but there is still so much that has to play out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's tough when you hear those kind of words from a captain, who gave it his all, but taking that responsibility. I'm a little curious about the cryptic last message there. They'll see how the relegation series goes. So I'm wondering if this team ends up dissolving if for some reason the relegation doesn't go too bad. For so long in the elite, 3 straight seasons to get back down to the pro is a huge step backwards. So I'm curious to see what will happen in that series and the outcome of it as well.
All right, so that's 2 teams down. We want to move on, of course, to the next 2 teams here because obviously, again, a lot to talk about in this particular video before we even get to the playoff teams. So next 2 teams we are going to discuss. We have Team Leisure in 14th and Gotham Knights in 13th. And let's start off talking about Team Leisure on this one, a club that was in the elite division since season 8, of course, as you know, previously known as the Deadly/Brace Phantoms in a previous life. And Cyn, honestly, a shocking result for them as they go from the 6th seed the prior season in the playoffs to being on the fringe of potentially getting relegated depending on how that postseason battle goes. And the worst part is the team stayed the same, but the offense essentially disappeared.
Yeah, it was odd to watch at times. It almost seemed like it was an otherworldly force taking them over. And when we got to cover them, especially, it didn't look like the same team. Jerseys aside, it just seemed like something was off and hard to put your finger on it, but it's just something didn't click this season.
Absolutely. You have the captain in Frankie on defense. He went from 26 points, 8 goals, to just having 7 points on the season with 0 goals scored. Mid-season switch saw Giselle return to the lineup for the first time since season 9. He put up 6 points in 14 games on defense. But the catalyst for him returning to the lineup was the benching of Profane Kiss up front, who went from 44 points last year to just 13 points in 18 games. This, of course, led to Psycho Skills moving from defense to forward, an active decision on their part, where they viewed him as their best forward or as their best offensive threat. And he finished with over a point per game for the 2nd year in a row and did seemingly lead the team offensively to improve after they had been shut out, I do believe, 10 times in the regular season. As well, Krinka drops from 45 points to just 25, and Playmaker SJ from 50 points to just 29. Cyn, there's one guy we haven't talked about yet, but their team MVP. I think we're in agreement on who this is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's RPH. I think we mention him every single broadcast, and every single time he's on the ice, he is a difference maker. And it's tough to have that on your back where it feels like you need to get a shutout or only allow one goal to give your team a chance to win. And even sometimes that wasn't enough. I mean, you saw it. They were shut out almost a sickening amount of times for how talented they can be offensively. I don't know how else to describe it. It just seemed like just crazy to me. I mean, RPH did the best he can, but he is only one man. You need some help up front.
Absolutely. And again, we got a word in with the captain of the team. It was Frankie. He had this to say about the season. Our roster stayed the same, but we started slow and couldn't get our scoring going, which was the opposite of last year's problem. And a big problem for us as well has been the introduction of the German server in Frankfurt. We simply can't practice against high-level skilled teams outside of a team like Zurich. We can't match Scandinavian teams. But as much as that sounds like an excuse, it comes down to the fact that we simply didn't do enough. Plain and simple, we got shut out 8 or 9 times in our first 18 games or so, which is really disgusting. Funny, Cyn, of course, that you happen to use a similar word in sickening. If it wasn't as if we weren't competitive, but after a while, it was a chip on our shoulder, and it led to more mistakes. We do feel like we were starting to figure it out on our own end, especially beating Yip towards the back half of the season. So I wouldn't say we're done in Elite just yet. So again, big part of the reason as to why we wanted to put this video together. You look at a team like this, again, that went from 6th in the playoffs last year to missing out, and they are in a relegation battle. We'll see how that plays out. I want to move over to talking about the team just ahead of them in the standings. We have the Gotham Knights in 13th this year, a slight improvement from their 15th place finish the year before. Couple of changes here, though, as well. I mean, Yom dropped from an 82% save percentage down to 75. On defense, Rimpe came over from Roots to take a full-time defensive spot, a move they really needed to make. Although Rimpe did drop from 44 points to just 26. Samza on defense as well, dropping from 20 points to 17 from the year before. And then we get to the front three. Karani from 39 points to 41, so a decent improvement there. Big improvement from the captain, Red Misty, up from 18 points to 34. And iHandy as well from 28 points to 46. Scored 9 more goals this season, so a big improvement there. They scored as many goals, if not more, than 2 playoff teams, Vesapampa and Northern Ascendancy. But they were top 5 in goals against. The defense just wasn't there, and the big drop in save percentage really didn't help them. Cyn, in terms of a team MVP, though, who do we got? Who stood out for Gotham?
Got to give it to iHandy. I mean, that point improvement is huge. It really seemed like the Gotham Knights really emphasized getting more offense, but oftentimes when you look to improve one thing, maybe a bit too much emphasis on it. As you mentioned, top 5 in goals against. That's simply not going to be good enough in a division such as the ECL Elite, where every team can score. The challenge is keeping that puck out of the net, and Gotham Knights just simply wasn't good enough at that this season.
Now, we were able to get a word as well with Red Misty, the captain. He had this to say: our biggest problems came after the Christmas break. 7-1-2 entering the break despite new players, knowing it would take time to get chemistry. We were pretty happy with that, but we had trouble scoring after the break, even more trouble holding leads late in the third. And ultimately, Cyn, he does view this season as a pretty big disappointment, which I don't know if I can necessarily disagree with that. Tough end of the season for the Gotham Knights.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like, Gotham Knights and Team Leisure especially were both teams that we were looking, to be improving or at least, staying near the same. And I think both of them just kind of took a step back, which again is not something that you want to do in the ECL Elite. And they're going to probably be looking for ways to right the ship, but they got, the relegation battle in front of them.
All right, so a few more teams to talk about here before we get to the big matchups, the playoff battles. Next up, let's talk about the next 2 teams that were in order there. We have number 11, Sawo Esports, and number 12, YMCA. And we're going to talk about YMCA first here, of course. Give credit to Sawo, talking about them next. The former Unlucky Boys, who have been in the Elite Division since Season 6. Long-time team here. They finished as the 5th seed last year and took H-Reds to the limit in a 7-game series in the first round. So really, it's a gigantic fall-off to be the closest team to a relegation spot. They are safe for next year. But ultimately, we look at some of the stat lines here. Viltzup in goal drops from an 84% save percentage to just 77%. Wenger on defense drops from 24 points to just 13. And Julius goes from 19 points in a full season to playing in just 6 games this year. Had 5 points in those games, though. But unfortunately for him, a new job was restricting his game time that he had available to him. And that resulted in the new addition from Pro Division and Copipelia slotting. And he did put up an impressive 55 points in 22 games, though, as a rookie. We talk about the forwards. JM goes from 39 points up to 42. But then, Sin, the biggest change of all, Angel Kuru, the captain, goes from 44 points in a full season last year to just playing in 8 games. He had 6 points in those 8 games, but mandatory military service started in January. That's a thing that affects quite a few of these lineups throughout the ECL entirely. The result, of course, is Mozia coming up from the Pro Division, who did put up a very respectable 28 points in 26 games as a rookie. And then, of course, the last forward to talk about is Timothy going from 43 points to 44, but he did so in 2 less games. So lineup changes clearly had an effect, and not for the better. They couldn't really put it together in time. Sin, for the MVP, though, I think it's a tough choice. Who do you have here in this situation, knowing that they had those changes to make?
Yeah, it was such a tough choice. I mean, you got to give credit to the new guys stepping in, taking on those roles, and at least helping this team be competitive with such an established lineup. As you mentioned, they've been in the elite for a while now. Copipelia and Moja, I mean, they both did great in their debut campaigns. It simply just wasn't quite enough. And it just seemed like, they couldn't keep up with the rising talent in the ECL, as so many more teams, especially in the middle of the standings, as we pointed out so often, was just so competitive.
Yeah. Now, I was able to get a word with Timothy as well, who is optimistic that the team can get back into the playoffs. They are thankful to have avoided the relegation spot. And ultimately, they view the pro teams that are going to have a shot at moving up as incredibly dangerous. So they're thankful now to be able to get that second chance heading into next year. And we'll see, of course, what their lineup ends up being. And that brings us to perhaps the most interesting team, and the reason why I really wanted to be able to do this. And again, I'm glad, of course, you were able to join me alongside this for these talking points, because I know this team as well really caught your eye this season. Yeah. We have Sawo in 11th, the former Checkmate squad. They've been in elite since season 9. And talking about the team up and down the lineup, Uwiski in goal went from a 79% save percentage to an 81, only in 18 games, though. So Mehukati, who was normally a forward in pro and light, steps up, plays 12 games, kind of struggled in goal, though, but with a very nice 69% save percentage. The defense, though, they lost Viljo to Dark Horse, and Make Axel went down to the Pro Division with Enigma. Replacing them first was Mr. Nipsely. Hello, friendo. Who drops back from forward, goes from 36 points to 18. And then the big controversy, I'd say, this season, they acquire Super Virta from Philadelphia, but he departs after just 8 games. And while that seems like it would have been a gigantic negative, Sin, ultimately, it was the catalyst for an incredible comeback. Captain tackle control, dropped down from center to defense. Despite having 46 points last year, he finished with just 15 this season. But then, Sin, tell us about the big acquisition.
I mean, yeah, they got Chrysitus from Dark Horse. 8 points in 6 games, and he puts up 27 points in 22 games with Sawo. I mean, that's ridiculous. The transition from elite to pro, it seemed seamless for this guy. I mean, the other elite rookie, Akunku, he put up 36 points in half of a season. Sawo just went from 0 to 100 and shocked everyone and shocked me. I mean, we were talking about them early in the season as possibly already being in a relegation battle. They fight their way back into a respectable 11th place from that rough start. I mean, that's impressive all the way across.
Absolutely. I mean, like you said, for the 2 former teammates in Pro Division, again, the 27 points for Chrysitus and the 36 for Kunku. And of course, on the other side there, Nats. He did go from 35 points to 32, but still a respectable number. So then they went from 2-4-0 to start the new year. So January comes along, they're 2-4-0. Looks like, okay, they're still going to be in this battle. But then a series with Dark Horse on the 13th of January turned it all around. They went 8-1-1 to finish the season. going from, as you said, what looked to be a sure relegation battle to safety. Relegation fodder at the start to a team that could have pushed for a playoff spot. They had just a little bit more time. Team MVP, Cyn, who do you have? Who deserves the credit for this?
Well, I mean, some of my bias is going to show up, but when when you're a player on a team and you make a sacrifice such as tackle control did, being a nearly 50-point scorer, dropping back to defense, that means you love the boys, you love the team, you want to win, you do what's best for the squad, and I mean, what else can you say? It worked. Simple as that. Reuniting Chrysitus with a Kunku, it really kind of saved this team's season in some way. We were like we mentioned, they were relegation, seemed prime to be maybe even that last place slot, fighting it out with Dark Horse, and here they are, 11th, far from the relegation position and guaranteed elite season again.
Incredible as that is. And we were able to get a word with tackle control, the captain, about this season. He said, coming into the year, I had faith in the team, but we had to make some roster changes due to a motivation issue. It was very disappointing that the person we chose to fill in for him ended up, despite the promises he made, being equally as unmotivated as the person he replaced. So a little bit harsh on that one. But looking ahead to when Virta dropped out, I was incredibly frustrated. The transfer deadline had already been closed for Light, and there were only 2 hours left in the pro trade deadline. Virta had told us after the first Gotham Knights match that we were in the middle of that he would be leaving after the second match was finished, claiming he had no motivation despite promising us he would be committed and motivated to play throughout the year. So we had to think who would be the best replacement and ended up with getting Chrysitus, a player that turned out to be a lottery win for us, which, again, we both agree with that. Also, I have to give credit to Virtsu, who allowed Chrysitus to join us despite Dark Horse facing challenges early on in the season as well. The feeling of survival is amazing. Uiski proved the doubters wrong. He is still an elite goaltender, and by the end of the season, the confidence was there from everyone at an individual and team level. We will likely see some changes this offseason that will reveal in the future, but we are very confident heading into next year. Cyn, your thoughts on some brutally honest comments from tackle control?
I mean, sometimes that's what's needed. What a leader does sometimes is just tells it like it is and again says it like it is, does what needs to be done. Tackle control just seems like that kind of person to me, and I'm very excited to see what this team is going to bring in the way of lineup changes and just what they're going to do next season in the ECL Elite, because those are some bold words. We saw them at the end of the season. That is an incredible performance. Imagine if they get off to an 8-1-1 start next year. I mean, that's confidence up the wazoo. And from there, all you got to do is play decent hockey to get yourself into a playoff position. So really excited to see them next season.
All right, so now we get to our final two non-playoff teams. Very, very close for both of these clubs, but just on the outside looking in. We have SJ and in 10th, Kova, who we will start off talking about here. They finished in the 10th spot for the second season in a row. They've been in Elite now since Season 7. And we look at the individual players here. Monkeyhead in goal drops from an 83% save percentage down to 77. You lose Lavinainen on defense to the light division. He put up 12 points last year. He was replaced by Sakam from Conquer, who was able to put up 19 points. Fakiri as well drops some points from 21 to 16. You can already kind of see a trend here. From forwards, they lose Picards. He had 38 points last year. He goes down to the pro division, but they replace him with Season 1 original Hunelli, who returns for the first time to the Elite Division since Season 5. Cyn, you want to name off this point total? Because I don't think we can't name him Rookie of the Year, but we can certainly name him Comeback Player of the Year.
Absolutely. I mean, you come back from that long of an absence and it's 51 points in 30 games played. It's almost like he never left. And some players are just like that. It's like riding a bike. You just come back and you start tearing it up. He was a bright spot for Kova.
Absolutely. And again, the two forwards next to him that stayed, you had Veluxit up from 45 points to 51 and Zip Player from 32 to 45. But unfortunately, and ultimately, it was a +1 goal differential. The goal scoring was there, but the defense was not. They miss out on a postseason spot by just 3 points after having bounced in and out of that playoff spot for the last week or so. Cyn, team MVP, you want to talk about him again?
Yeah, well, I could talk about them, but before we get into it, I'm pretty sure everyone knows what we are. I'll keep you in suspense for a couple moments. I just want to point out, as we kind of notice a trend here in the ECL, when we're talking about these teams who didn't make the playoffs, the point totals, sometimes they go down, other players go up, but what is always something that we talk about here is how the goals against has gone up and their goal differential isn't as good. And it just goes to show you, once again, defense just is so important. But yeah, team MVP, I mean, it's got to be the comeback story, as you mentioned, Hunelli. His return to the top division, one for the ages. I mean, if he's committed to stay up here, I think Kova could really make a push into the playoffs.
Absolutely. Now I got a word with Zip Player here as well. He said this: unfortunately, we weren't able to play at our highest level game in and game out, which you simply have to do if you want to win. The Elite Division is the best of the best, and any team can take points off of you. We definitely wanted more, and with that bit of extra time and chemistry, we can be a playoff team. I'm very happy with the squad. The guys are all motivated, and the wait for next season is going to be a long one. So, Cyn, I think a team right now that realizes that right now the pieces are in place. They just need to get that little bit of extra chemistry down. And then we move on to talking about SJ, whether it be SJ Gaming at the start of the year or just SJ now, up from 13th last year and just their third season in Elite. Again, they finished in 9th, and it was a heartbreaking finish. They missed out on the playoffs via tiebreaker. One goal can be the difference. They had the most goals scored by a non-playoff team, a top 6 offense. But Cyn, you mentioned it, defense wins championships. They were third in goals allowed. You're simply not going to win in that situation.
No, and it's actually impressive that they got into 9th place with that kind of goals against. And, you know, especially with Hiatala, who went from a 76 save percentage down to a 73. I mean, we know he's a great goaltender. He just, you know, unfortunately, you need 5 men in front of you to also be playing defense. So I'm sure it doesn't feel good for him, doesn't feel good for the team to miss out by 1 goal. And again, that's often why you see teams playing from buzzer to buzzer, because you never know when you're going to get into a situation like that. But yeah, once again, you pointed it out, defense, and they simply didn't do enough of it this season.
And speaking of the defense, you had Captain Terity, similar point total to the year before, 21 points last year, 22 now this season, but the defense was shaken up a little bit. Aubeli sat out the season, and E. Koski went from being a depth player on Havu to actually starting the season in pro with a club called Tunnel Vision, to playing the full 30-game season with SJ. Did put up 29 points in a full season, but again, there was a change there on defense. But the big issue for them, despite the fact that the offense was consistent, was the amount of games missed up front. We already talked about E.A. Bunka, a new acquisition, played 28 games with his new club, put up 42 points, which is solid. Yakuri played in 26 games, put up 50 points this year compared to the 48 from last year, so very good stuff there. But from there is when the changes really came in. Oya Mosca came over from last year's automatically relegated club in Almost Famous, and after a 6-game stint with Enigma in pro, so another guy who was picked up at the deadline, he puts up 27 points in 18 games, but he had 40 points in a full season last year. So again, you talk about someone who's capable, but he just wasn't in the lineup full time. They also had Yorma come up from Pro Division last year. He put up 26 points in 14 games as a rookie, which is fantastic. But again, just 14 games. And then you also had Maisukari, who had 29 points in a full season last year. But Cyn, I think the reason why the name, I'm uncertain, only 4 games this season, 8 points when he played. But again, you look at all these forwards, they're more than capable of putting up points, hence the top 6 offense. But that lack of chemistry, and we see it with these clubs, they always have a main front 3. How exactly do you choose a front 3 out of this many capable players?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it seems like chemistry is a big issue, and when you think about, you know, how much their defense struggled, a lot of that has to do with at times the forwards. I mean, forwards have to play defense as well, and especially when you have all those guys filtering in and out, chemistry can be so hard to get set. And the fact that they finished 9th throughout all that can spell, you know, a lot of positives for their future, but they got to get that lineup figured out.
Absolutely. So team MVP, it was tough, but ultimately we said nobody. The defensive struggles really sank them, and like we said, the offense was the bright spot. But when every forward performs well, you got to figure out who that main 3 are going to be. next season. Not a bad idea, though, to have this amount of depth. That's very impressive. And ultimately, we were able to get a word with the captain in Terity, who said we were as prepared as you could be, but some late changes to the lineup this year definitely caused issues. I'll say our goal differential doesn't match our mentality, though. If we were down 1 to 2 goals before the third, we didn't really care if we lost by 1 goal or 6. We went all out offense and tried to win. So a respectable strategy there. Again, you can see the signs of why they had that top offense. But
yeah,
again, and you mentioned it, and we'll continue to talk about it. Defense wins championships.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as you mentioned, you can see the signs of why they would have that high goal total. But, in his words, they would go all out offensively. Doesn't matter if we lose by 1 or 6. Definitely part of the reason they had such a high goals against as well.
All right, so now we're done talking about the non-playoff teams. Our season recap is over in some ways. Of course, we'll be talking about what these teams are able to do, the playoff teams, and what they were able to do. Now, we did go from worst to the best in terms of the non-playoff teams, saving the best for last. But when talking about the playoffs, you talk about the best first, and there was no better than our 1 seed in Philadelphia as they reclaim the top spot. They will be taking on the 8th seed in Northern Ascendancy. And talking about Philadelphia first, and they've had to hear it all year long. Last year's runner-ups, they are former champions. Of course, they've reclaimed this number 1 seed, though, after a very impressive performance over Havu in match day 14 that I simply couldn't believe, as dominant of a performance against Havu as we've ever seen. And Sim, when talking about this team, I think you have to start in talking about Kape. What stood out for you with him this year?
Yeah, well, we didn't even know if he was going to play goal. He was listed on the website as a forward at times due to a glitch because of where he was in, the SCL, I guess it would be. There we go. I wanted to say SHL. But then he has, 12 shutouts. 12 shutouts this season.
Yeah.
And this guy was going to play forward. I mean, it's hard, to take away from someone what they want to do, maybe playing forward. I mean, everyone wants to play out. It's fun to do from time to time, but when you're that good and your team depends on you, Kape, I mean, what a season he had.
Yeah, I mean, again, you talk about a guy who maintained that 80% save percentage from the prior year, but goes from 3 shutouts last year to an all-time record in the season with 12. Again, I do believe the previous record was 9 in the season from Hanselinho on Havu. Speaking to the defense as well, though, Sin, here we saw a lot of changes with this team. You see Loimu drop from 43 points to just 28. J Toro drops from 38 points to just 25. And the forwards dropped off as well. Potzloff, the captain, from 62 points to 57. You have Playmaker dropping from 93 points with 58 goals to just 64 points and 28 goals. And Eki as well, 82 points last year to just 68 this year. But while the goals per game went from a 4.3 last year to just a 3.17, their defense went from third to best. And to jump off here before we name a team MVP, I was able to interview Potzloff about this and what the changes were. And he said, we didn't really try to actively change our strategy or focus on defense. It was just a coincidence that our defense went up. But we feel like we're getting better defensively year in and year out. Our players know how to properly position themselves, and Kape's contributions are important as well. Scoring-wise, the numbers dropping off was more bad luck than anything. We did have the most shots out of all teams after all. So this is a team that is feeling incredibly confident heading back into the playoffs, wanting to reclaim their crown. Sin, for team MVP, is it possible to name just one person?
When you have a team like Philadelphia, I mean, we tried to look at it when we got to cover them. We tried to look at it before this. We tried to find an MVP, but this isn't a team of 6 individuals. This is a one unit, and they are the MVP. Philadelphia is the MVP of Philadelphia. It sounds crazy, but they play so in sync. You can't even tell who's there. And I like that, Potzloff mentioned that they're all good at their, positionally. They didn't necessarily try to force anything. What happened. And coincidentally, they just improved to the best defense with still a tremendous offense.
And to be able to stifle everybody defensively like they did for 30 games in a regular season is absolutely incredible. Which brings us to talking about the team that has a monumental task ahead of them. Even though we saw the 8th seed upset the 1 seed last year, I think Northern Ascendancy knows what they're facing. But before we talk about their chances, of course, we need to talk about how this team went from 14th last year to making the playoffs. That is an incredible jump from them. Sapric's in goal goes from a 78% save percentage up to an 80, so a decent improvement there. But they had a complete change on defense as Furion leaves for FBK, 20 points for the all-time leading scorer amongst defensemen, leaving your team. And Kana Lapena as well dropped down to Pro Division. So they bring in Totali from FBK. It was almost a trade there with Farjestad as he drops, though, from 18 points to 17, but you pretty much know what you were going to get with him. And Tonkelia as well, in just his second ECL season, jumps from light, our lowest division, to elites, and put up 16 points in a full season, again, scouted after a tremendous set of performances in the previously aforementioned SCL and in the FCL as well. He was able to play in both. They did lose Mookie Maisteri, who is one of the top point getters all time in the elite division as well. He dropped down to light. He had 33 points last year, so that was a pretty big thing to have to overcome. And Teahala also sat out this season, 23 points that they had to look to replace. But they very much did, as they gained Hugh Eagleson, who played his first full season since season 8. You talk about someone else, comeback player of the year, maybe 49 points from him, and Dillinger as well, who also came back to the elite division for the first time since season 7. He put up 40 points. And then Cyn, the captain as well, in Martindale, from 22 points to 40. What a turnaround for Northern Ascendancy.
Yeah, and as Martindale, we always talk about him, how strong he is defensively, and it's kind of crazy. He is one of the strongest defensive centers here, and for him to get that offensive side to his game as well, he's a threat in all three zones now, and someone that, you know, if you're Philadelphia, you're going to have to respect and key in on just a little bit.
Absolutely. Team MVP?
Martindale. I mean, that sort of improvement, we just talked about it. It's going to have to be him. I mean, much like we saw with Sawo, the captain deserves credit for, you know, his team's turnaround. And what's the reward for it? Well, you get to face Philadelphia. So hard to say that that's an easy task, but you know what? This team's got heart, and they'll at least try to give as much as as a fighting chance to Philadelphia. And we know they're going to leave it all out there on the ice.
Absolutely. And we were able to get a word with Martindale as well. He said this: we would have preferred a slightly easier opponent. You don't say. But we'll take it over not being in the playoffs at all. But right now, we're confident. It took us a while to get things going and to gel as a team. We started off slow to the point where we barely made it. And even at the end, we weren't sure if we would. But hey, even by a point, we made it. And that's something to be proud of. We're looking at possibly shaking things up. What do we have to lose after all? And Cyn, this is the first time we see this. I mean, obviously, our first playoff matchup, but controversial here. I'm wondering if this is gamesmanship or not, but he says the game plan for Northern Ascendancy is for Martindale to move from center to left wing, with Dillinger taking over at center. And he says, for the sake of helping the other two take over with myself in more of a support role. And while I'm flattered for being named MVP of your team for the moves, he gives credit to Saprix. We wouldn't be here if he wasn't leading the way in our bend, don't break defense. But very interesting that as the captain, again, he's able to view it as Hugh Eagleson and Dillinger have this incredible chemistry. Why have them on the wings, get them that much closer to be able to work their magic and do their job? And I'll, fill in and play where I can. So very interesting decision there for this team.
Yeah, and I'm actually really interested to see him on the wing with how good he is with that defensive skill stick. He could be deadly on the forecheck if that's the sort of system they want to run to. So Martindale definitely got to look out for, but I like it. Again, the captain doing what he needs, what he feels is best for the team.
So again, I don't know if we're going to give our predictions at all, but obviously the feeling for this matchup is in a big win, a quick win for Philadelphia. But Northern Ascendancy, at least, not resting on their laurels, happy to make the playoffs, but they want a little bit more. Now, of course, the other side of El Clasico. We've talked about Philadelphia. Let's talk about our defending champions in Havu, as they will be taking on 7th seed Roots. Let's talk about Havu first. The 3 seed last year, the 2 seed this year. And another team where, we saw some changes, but the consistency was still there. We look at the goal differential, for example. Last year, 103 goals for, 40 against. This year, 106 for, 45 against. So still very consistent from them. But the big change, Sibelius taking over in the crease, goes from an 85% save percentage with Yip to a 78% save percentage. And we'll hear a little bit as to what happened behind the scenes there. But defensively as well, we see some more point total drops. Villikun drops from 32 points to 25. Now Sestelia from 29 to 27. But then again, Sin, the big change aside from Sibelius, Pawanzo drops out of this lineup after a 54-point season the year before. And who replaces him? From in-house, Hanselinho. Sin, what do we got to say about this? Hanselinho jumping back up to forward.
Well, what else could you say besides unreal performance? He just to make that sort of transition and to be as productive, might be a bit easier with a team like Havu, but at the same time, to skate with Havu, you got to be as good as them, and that's Hanselinho proved that game in, game out. 68 points in 30 games. Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, his first season as a skater since season 6. Proved that he is not at a place in the slightest. Speaking of the other two forwards, Dominointi jumps from 64 points up to 67, and Flyer Kungan, the captain, from 73 to 75. Now, Sin, quickly here, again, I'll speak to the interview before we name kind of a team MVP, and it really is tough to say, but I think it'll help people understand our team MVP a little bit more, even though, again, plenty of options for sure. But I was able to get a word with Flyer Kungan. And he said this about the Sibelius pickup, that it was an easy transition. They all knew him before. Easygoing person as well. Also internet famous now. So shout out to him. His incredible skating stride. But, he's easygoing. So the atmosphere for our team is on point. There was an obvious adaptation for him to go from facing a lot more shots with Yippee Voskala to so few. So it's understandable that the save percentage dropped off, but he has championship experience as well, so really we're not worried. And we never fail because of our goaltenders. And while others may have doubted Hanselinho for his abilities outside of the crease, we had no doubts. We have a tactical squad, and he has the vision and IQ in spades to match. And also, he knows Dominointi like his own pockets, which is an incredible quote, in my opinion. For them, playoffs are all that matter. We're going for the repeat, and he'll be a big part of that. So when talking about team MVPs, and I think you can look at it, Hanselinho or Sibelius. We went with Sibelius, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, both transitions, maybe you could argue easier to go from crease to crease, but it is a different system in front of you. With Yippee Voskala, yes, they did face more shots, but he also, it was like, a lot of those more low percentage shots. So Yippee Voskala did that really well, keeping people to the outside. The way Havu defends is, I was going to talk about layers of defense all over the ice. So yeah, when something does sneak through, it might be a bit higher percentage from time to time, or just a fluky goal that goes in, which is why we see that save percentage drops. But he's there for a reason. They name him as the MVP for a reason. Watch out for him in the playoffs.
And again, Havu allowing just 5 more goals as a team this year. So for a goalie to have to try and fill the immense shadow of Hanselinho in the crease for that particular team, he did one hell of a job. Yep. Then we get into talking about their opposition. It is the 7th seed in Roots Gaming. 2nd year in a row that they have been the 7th seed heading into the playoffs. Of course, they were swept by Philadelphia in the first round last year. But we talk about this team, and we have to talk about the goaltending first, as Swag drops from an 81% save percentage in a full season down to 79, but in just 14 games, as they picked up Kazu, who jumped from light to pro and now to elite in subsequent seasons. 16 games as an elite rookie. He also put up a 79% save percentage. So very consistent goaltending for Roots. And Sin, ultimately a tough choice for them come playoff time now for who you have to pick, who gets the start.
Yeah, this is the definition of a goalie controversy. And I even question if they even know who they're going to go with there in game one. With 2 goaltenders that played so evenly, numbers-wise, games-wise, and every time it seemed like, a different one was out there, they were getting similar results, putting up similar numbers, and it's just, I do not envy Roots Gaming who have to make this decision.
Absolutely. We look elsewhere on the team. Their captain on defense, Tonsky, drops from 22 points to 19. Seeley jumps from 23 to 28, so it kind of offsets. And up front, Migo Buna jumps from 44 points up to 48, so a decent improvement for him. Karani, who had 39 points last year, and Rimpe, who had 44, leave for Gotham Knights. So what we see here is Sada Poika returning after a year away from Roots. He put up 40 points, though, this year in a full season. And then the big addition, Fopa Toflin, joining after splitting time between Elite and Pro last year with Luleo and Djurgården, puts up 53 points in a full season. The team, though, overall goes from 70 goals for, 72 against, to 67 goals for and only 59 against. So the offense was still on point, but they really tightened up defensively.
Yeah, and that's really what it's going to take, especially with the team that they're facing off against. They're going to have to be good defensively. You have to defend as much as you can, as well as Havu, and the goals will come. That's the thing about Ishil. You can always score goals, but keeping them out of the net is the tough one. And we talk about how the new additions and how good he was. I think he's got to get the MVP as well. Fopa Toflin, the season 1 original, he still got it, and he proved that in this season. He hasn't been here since the Elite, he hasn't been in the Elite since season 8. There we go. Easy for me to say. But didn't seem like he missed a step at all. And every time we covered them, it just seemed like we were mentioning his name constantly in the offensive zone.
Absolutely. So again, that race for comeback player of the year, rookie of the year, incredibly close. We were able to get a word with the captain in Tonski as well. And he said this: it was never easy to start with new players, no matter how much prep time that you have. With Rimpe leaving, we were covered. Sadapoika was available again after his military service was completed, but we played horribly in the FCL tournament, and Karani left after that. So we expected challenges, but then we spotted Fopa Toflin as a free agent, and I knew how good he was a few seasons ago, so it would have been irresponsible of me to not contact him. I love that quote. As for Kazu, we had full confidence in him, even though, and said, I didn't know this, 16 years old is Kazu between the pipes. So again, we've talked about the likes of Nicky Dangles before as well. Some of these kids are just absolute freaks. And he said this about Kazu. He has the virtual and IRL experience, so he plays goalie in real life too, because, hey, what can't he do? And I equate him and Swag, and this is one hell of a comparison, to Van Beesbrook and Richter in the 90s for the Rangers, 2 top goaltenders who can push one another. No pressure on these 2 goalies, huh?
I'm curious if Kazu even is aware of that duo. I mean, I've been 16 years old. I've never felt so ancient. I've never felt so unaccomplished in video games until now, knowing that he's out there at 16 doing this kind of stuff. But yeah, in all seriousness, not too bad of a comparison to make. And that's one of those good problems that you hear about in hockey, having 2 good players at a single position.
Absolutely. And the final point here, he said, is our key this season was the ability to be honest with ourselves. When we were playing poorly, we'd admit it, take responsibility, no hurt feelings. Let's just adjust. And now I feel like if we play our game, strong defense, and make the most of that ability to adapt and adjust offensively, we have the ability to at least make this an incredibly tough series for Havu. So again, some very honest, candid opinions from a captain here in Tonski. We'll see what happens for Roots Gaming. Big challenge ahead of them against the defending champions. All right, Sin, here we go. Penultimate matchup here. We have the 3 seed in H-Reds taking on the 6 seed in Vesa Pampa. Let's talk about H-Reds first. Up from 4th last year, they lost in the semifinals to eventual champions in Havu. Now, talking about this team, I think the first place you have to start is the goaltending, as they lose Nike to the Pro Division, mainly because of military service. He had a 75% save percentage in 18 games last year, 12 playoff games last year, though. He was the star, 83% save percentage for them last year. But again, he drops out. Finn Kona takes over full time, 79% save percentage last year in 12 games, a 78 this year in a full season. The defense as well saw some changes. Janza drops to light division. He put up 22 points last year, but he is replaced in-house by King of Apes, who goes from a utility player to a full-time defender, puts up 38 points as a defenseman, led the league. So what a replacement he was. And then as well on defense, you have Temu jumping up from 20 points to 32. So certainly one of the stories of the year for H-Reds there. And of course, as well, for the forwards, we also saw big improvements. Yoki up from 65 points to 78. You had Captain Benito going from 61 to 77. Nicky Dangles, though, dropped off from 70 points to 60, his lowest total in 3 seasons. But Yeah, when 60 points is your lowest career point total, you're doing something right. So this is a team that went from being tied for the third best offense to now being tied for the league's best. And they also had the third best defense as well, rather than being just a tiny bit lower in fourth. So general improvements across the board for H-Red Sin. What stands out to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, a player stands out. King of Apes. He stood out a couple ways this year with his point totals. Yes, we know about that, but harken back to the beginning of the season where King of Apes, I forget who it was, but he got absolutely walked, dangled out of his pads, and then a goal was scored. And ever since that moment, King of Apes was on a mission because you can imagine everyone saw it. It was on broadcast, unfortunately for him. The chirps came out on Twitter, and then he just goes out of his mind, and I love it. The point totals are great, but he really doubled down and wanted to get better at defense, and going from a utility player to a full-time roster player and then breaking out as he did, MVP hands down.
Absolutely. And we got word from Benito as well. Our goal for this season was absolutely to take the number 1 seed, but we dropped points where we couldn't afford to. And everyone knows that you just can't do that with Havu and Philadelphia in this league. Speaking to goaltender Finn Kone, he said he did get off to a rough start, big shoes to fill, but we're confident in him heading into the playoffs. And the same thing with King of Apes. He just got better. The forwards did as well. And Nicky Dangles especially improved his two-way game. So we're not worried about him dropping off offensively. That's a big part of the reason as to why our defensive game has improved. So still confident that they can get better and confident that they can be dominant against Vesapampa. So again, very strong words there. I do like the bit of attitude that we've heard at times. And we'll move on to speaking about their opposition in Vesapampa. Sin, another team that improved. 11th place finish last year. They missed the playoff, though, by just 1 point. Second season in Elite, though, Sin. And we look here, another team that had some big changes. Toonborg and Disco Cricken both sit on the sidelines this year as Elite rookie FaZe takes over in net in just his second ECL season. He played in our third tier in Neo last year. Sin, an incredible 80% save percentage for him.
Yeah, he hit the mark, and that's what you want to do. And it's, it's tough to see guys that we saw, Toonborg, Disco Cricken, 2 goaltenders that helped get you into Elite, but they went with FaZe and didn't disappoint. We talk about all the time, you want to get to that 80% save mark. He did it for them throughout the season, and he's going to need to try to do that for them in the postseason against such a strong offensive team in H-Reds.
Now they saw some changes on defense as well as Antonio Mannin leaves for Farjestad, replaced by Sebbe Larson, who left Vesapampa as they were promoted to the Elite Division. So he missed all of last season. He was a role player for Philadelphia, not able to walk away with the championship, unfortunately, there. But he comes back and puts up 14 points in 22 games. And, of course, it was well known how much better they performed when he was in the lineup. As well, Elite rookie Sparka Ronberg played the other games that he could not play, had 3 points this season after jumping up from light, so a decent for him as well. Up top, we had Ekin, who dropped from 40 points to 35, so not too bad there. Jurgeli improves from 37 to 40. He looked very impressive in the final week. We got to give him credit for that. And Villapoika goes from 36 points in just 16 games last year to 38 and 30. So maybe not the improvement or the all-out point total that we would have thought we would have expected from him. But they did have a change as well. Nampus, who had played 12 games last year with 11 points, sat out this season, hence Villapoika playing full-time. So a dead even goal differential, 62 for, 62 against. Might be a little bit lucky to have made the playoffs in these circumstances. But again, Vesapampa in the playoffs in just their second season. Sin, who stood out for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it matters when you score goals. It also matters when you don't, allow goals. And FaZe has got to be the MVP for Vesapampa. He just seemed, it's not the combo that they had last season, but it was enough to get it done. He was great in net. He's, as I said, going to need to continue to be that. And honestly, it's hard to, to always be giving, the rookie of the year to skaters, or it's easier to give it to the skaters, but you cannot forget about FaZe, who helped a former 11th place team make it into the playoffs in the 6th seed. And at times, Vesapampa was up there in 3rd place. So, I mean, they were right there on the cusp from being, counted as part of that big 3, big 4 that we always allude to.
Absolutely. So again, we'll see what happens with Vesa Pampa moving forward. And Sin, if it's okay with you, we're going to jump right in to our final playoff matchup, because while I said we talk about the best first and don't necessarily save the best for last, I still feel like we're saving the best for last. I was like a kid on Christmas morning when I discovered that we were getting this matchup. It's the battle of 4 and 5. Färjestad and Jyväskylä go head to head one more time, and we talk about FBK first, because last year they made the playoffs as the 8th seed via tiebreaker over Checkmate, and of course that led to the historic upset of number 1 seed Jyväskylä. An incredible turnaround that sent shockwaves throughout the elite division, Sin, that I still feel like we're feeling to this day.
Absolutely. I mean, it's no secret what happened to the Jyväskylä lineup after that, and you can't help but, at least attribute a little bit of that to the beating that they took from Färjestad, who was one of, not a great defensive team whatsoever, seemed to just win by not luck, but those quick strike abilities. And all of a sudden they were able to shut down Jyväskylä. And then this season, all throughout the beginning, a tremendous defensive team. They had to get back into their goal scoring ways a bit, and they did that. 4 seed, which is impressive, leaving no doubt of being a playoff team.
Absolutely. No, again, talking about the team, new name, same great goaltender. McSavid returns between the pipes to prove that dad strength rules all, from a 75% save percentage to a league-leading 83% amongst starters. They did see a change on defense as Totali left for Northern Ascendancy, as we talked about, but he was replaced by Furian from Luleå, which, again, big improvement there. He had 20 points last year, but 25 this year. Again, the all-time leading scorer amongst defensemen. Tough to find a more suitable replacement than that, I would say. Rubitus goes from 29 points to 23 in 4 fewer games as well, so not too bad. A similar output from him. But another big departure up top for FBK was Bastian. 47 points last year. He drops down to pro and is replaced, we thought at the time, controversially, by a defenseman. It's Antonio Mann, jumping up from Vesa Pampa. He goes to forward, but puts up 40 points in his first effort up top. He joined Afe alongside there on the wings. He returned for his second season, goes from 44 points to 42, but now has back-to-back 30-goal seasons. Of course, he really shined in that playoff matchup last year. And then, of course, you have the former Misa. It's Mullen up top from 50 points down to 47. But, Sim, we talked about it all season long. The big change, going from 6th in goals, but allowing the second most, to staying 6th in goals despite the changes, but now having a top 4 defense.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw the top 4 defense on display. I mean, I think at times it was even top 3, maybe even the top defense at times, at least on by the eye test. And, they just simply weren't scoring goals at the time. And to go from where they were at the beginning of the season, one of the worst in goals for, to 6th in goals for, while maintaining the good defense, something magical here is happening for Färjestad once again. And I cannot wait for this series to get started.
So, Sid, I'll leave it to you. Team MVP?
I mean, how can you not love him? It's McSavid. He's such an odd goaltender in that he doesn't necessarily play like everyone else, but he seems to just make saves. Whatever he does, it seems to work for him. And he was a huge part of why Färjestad had such a good defense, and he'll need to continue to be on his A game throughout the playoffs.
Absolutely, and we got word from him as well, saying this: it was tough to lose Totali and Bastian, 2 great teammates to have, but thankfully they were replaced by equally great people. We look at Antonio, his speed and skilled thumbs, Furian with his amazing 2-way play, and that was especially helpful as well with Antonio on the PK. It's like we never lost a defenseman, and we always had that stability back there. So I'd say the adjustment period was smooth. The language barrier as well was nil. All of us speaking Swedish was a factor this year as well. So we feel great heading into this series. So then, Sim, we get our final team to break down out of these 16, and it's the team that might have more pressure on them than anybody else. It's Jyväskylä, our 5th seed. Again, as we talked about, the number 1 seed last year, who lost in the first round, and as you mentioned, in convincing fashion. And we look this year, They went from the third best offense and second best defense to the fourth best and the sixth best defense. So dropping in offense, definitely dropping in defense. That's a big factor here. You lose Sibelius in goal to Havu. He is replaced by the tandem of Season 1 veteran Sandro, who had an 82% save percentage in 16 games. Incredible for him. Definitely a shout for goaltender of the year. And a rookie goalie as well in Teme, who put up 75% save percentage numbers in just 14 games. His first season, though, as a goaltender. He played skater last year in Tier 3 Neo. So incredible there, but I think it's clear that Sandro is their guy now heading into this matchup.
Yeah, they went with a pretty even split throughout the playoffs, but unlike Roots, I think Yippee Voskala knows who their guy is heading into the playoffs, and that does relieve a little bit of the uncertainty here. But what they need to be certain of is they have to put up a better performance against Färjestad than they did last season.
Indeed, and you look at the lineup changes as well. The defense did stay the same, although Domi apparently nearly left. It's a good thing he stayed, though. 35 points last year, 32 this year. Someone who can definitely contribute offensively. And then Omari next to him, again, close to the numbers he put up last year. He had 30 last year, 28 this season. But the big departure was Kriketsi. 65 points last year. He drops down to pro. How do you replace that? You replace him with an elite division rookie.
Yeah, and Vatu, a 51-point season, rookie of the year contender, hands down. But I mean, it is hard to replace Kriketski, but when you can put up that many points, it looks good. The thing that they, may have been missing is some of that physical presence that Kriketski brought to the table. That being said, Yippee Voskala is still a playoff team, still with a chance to sign, getting their wheels going, so to speak. And Vatu, I mean, filling those shoes pretty well.
As well, Antti goes from 69 points down to 55, so you could see the effect there. And Indy as well, from 58 down to 54. Cyn, team MVP, I have a feeling you already discussed him.
Yeah, Vatu. I mean, for a rookie to step into this lineup, especially seeing as what they went through as that one seed, getting sort of embarrassed in that first round. I mean, to play with the caliber of forwards that he was playing with and to produce in the way he did and make it seem like at times that Yippee Voskala team didn't lose a step, even if there was that bit of adjustment period in the early going, which, I mean, there always is going to be when you get into that league play. It was big shoes to fill, but he filled them well.
Absolutely. And we got word with Antti as well. Said this, it's a given that it takes some time to get chemistry going with the changes, but we're very happy with how we played to close out the season. So confidence is not an issue. He did acknowledge the collapse last year as well, saying it's still fresh in the mind. Definitely a motivator, though, and that they know they weren't on their game like they needed to be. So again, the mind games as well, definitely going to play a factor. Cyn, there we have it. The full season recap, the playoff preview. We are just about ready to go for the beginning of the playoffs here after another incredible regular season. But really, we're just now getting to the main course. The playoffs underway. Can't wait to see how this plays out and who will be crowned champion. Again, a $15K prize pool at stake. You guys can get all the information that you need, of course, NHLgamer.com and, of course, twitch.tv/NHLgamer. And, of course, you can follow us on all the social medias, Twitter, Instagram, and all that fun stuff. You can follow Cyn on Twitter at CynFtWProd. And, of course, on YouTube at CynFtWProductions as well. Myself at Tougie24, just about everywhere. Cyn, It's been a fun look back at what this season was, what happened with these teams, because we called it. It was an incredible offseason with an unbelievable amount of changes, and it all comes down to this. We get to the Elite Eight. Can't wait to see how this one plays out.